Spurs have pulled the trigger and decided to sack Ange Postecoglou. I thought I'd jump on and do a quick video in the aftermath of the news. I think largely it probably was expected given the silence that has followed the Europa League triumph over Manchester United in Bilbao. But at the same time, it is still kind of a big decision. I think, the winds of change are certainly going to sweep through the club this summer. You would say that the winning the Europa League and getting back into the Champions League was a golden ticket really for Postecoglou to potentially revitalise his project and actually, build something where he could kick on and fulfil his potential as a manager. I think we certainly saw glimpses in his first season at the club, particularly in those first 10 games when Spurs were top of the league, that, this was a project that could potentially take off. But at the same time, I really feel like, even from the get-go, Daniel Levy was never really 100% wholeheartedly sold on Postecoglou. I think there was a great quote that kind of summed it up from Postecoglou in his press conference after winning the Europa League, where he said, even Daniel said to me upon arrival, we've had winners like Antonio Conte and Jose Mourinho, and basically now we've got you. He wasn't the top pick at the time. If you remember rightly, there was a real grueling process when Spurs eventually settled on Postecoglou. But at first, it looked a really good fit. But I just don't think you can get away from the number of defeats they had last season, not only in all competitions but the Premier League. Finishing 17th is just, even now, I think we'll look back on that in years to come and just think, how did that happen? But ultimately, it didn't matter because they won the Europa League, and nobody can take that away from Ange or the side, because, we know how hard a competition that is to win. And, Premier League form ultimately goes out the window when you achieve something like that. But what's interesting about the Postecoglou sacking is the economics in particular. I think he got a £2 million bonus for winning the Europa League, and it's now cost Spurs in the region of £4 million on top of that figure to sack him and move on. So what do we know about the plan to replace him? Well, Ryan Mason, Postecoglou's assistant, has of course gone to join West Brom. Scott Munn is also leaving the club. He's been sacked as well. So there's a real shake-up off the field at Spurs already. But a new management team will be coming in, and we understand that, well, I say we, but those that have spoken to Tottenham understand that Thomas Frank is a leading candidate at this moment in time. Brentford are yet to receive a formal approach for his services, but there has been contact from Spurs to Frank. I'm not sure whether that's via intermediaries or, face-to-face conversations, but Spurs have been speaking to Frank in the past couple of weeks, and it's been clear that an approach maybe was on the cards. I think Marco Silva previously was a name that was linked with Spurs, but I would be surprised to see his name in the running. Looks like he's going to stay at Fulham. And then there's Andoni Iraola as well. He's only got 1 year left to run on his current deal at Bournemouth. Done a great job, much like Frank, particularly developing players and pushing Bournemouth towards European qualification, although they didn't quite get there. But with Bournemouth, expected to make a lot of changes to their squad this summer, some big sales. Huijsen's gone already. Looks like Kirkes will probably go to Liverpool. Zabani's being courted by PSG. You do wonder whether, if there was an opportunity there, that he would be willing to certainly consider it. I've reported recently that he recently snubbed a lucrative approach from the Saudi Pro League, which I understand was probably from Al Hilal, who have just appointed Simone Inzaghi as their new manager. But Frank at the moment looks like the clear front runner. There will probably be other candidates, but the way I kind of look at this is that if Spurs are sacking Postecoglou, they must surely have, a clear idea about who is going to replace him. Frank has got a big compensation package at Brentford. From what I've read, it could be high as £10 million, although when I've tried to sort of do some digging on it, sources were not prepared to comment, but it's believed to be up to £10 million. He's still under contract with Brentford for another 2 years, and Thomas Frank strikes me as someone that's not going to get up and leave unless he feels it's an upward step. He's been linked with various vacancies in the past couple of years, Manchester United, but never really. I think he was linked with Chelsea actually a couple of years ago as well, but never really been a concrete chance for him to leave Brentford, maybe until now. What's interesting is I know Frank's played a fundamental role in some of Brentford's early business as well. Queeve Kelleher, obviously an £18 million bargain from Liverpool, just arrived. He spoke very openly about the fact that Frank was influential in the decision to come to the club. I'm sure if Kelleher would have waited a little longer, he probably would have received other offers, maybe from clubs higher in the Premier League. And they're also chasing Anthony Malambo from Feyenoord. Now, I understand a bid's gone in and that Malambo's actually already visited the club's facilities. And you'd imagine that Thomas Frank has played a huge part in that pitch as well. Of course, they're kind of bigger fish to fry here in terms of the grand scheme of things. You've also got Manchester United in for Brian Mbeumo. So I do think there's going to be changes at Brentford this summer in terms of the way they're trying to progress the club. But you do kind of fear for, the trajectory of Brentford. They've been on such a brilliant journey if Frank was to leave the club. And alternatively, is he the right man for Tottenham? We don't quite know what the right man for Tottenham is, because so many top-class managers have struggled to achieve success there. But I think Frank would be a good fit in the face of things, that he's someone that can lead a project. But it's going to be difficult for Spurs to balance Champions League football now with Premier League and to really compete to get into that top 5, which we know has become increasingly difficult over the past couple of seasons. But I do also fear now that some of the Spurs players may want to consider their futures, because Postecoglou, regardless of results, had a great rapport and relationship with the core members of the Tottenham dressing room, not least Christian Romero. We know Atletico Madrid wants him. And, I do question now, from what I understand, that, with Postecoglou leaving, that could shape his future, because it would be difficult for him to try and push for a move on the back of Spurs winning the Europa League, because ultimately there's a real good feeling around the club at the moment. And, it'd almost be disrespectful if Romero's to try and force through a transfer. But at the same time, Spurs are not going to let him go for cheap. And I think there would be quite a little bit of a gap in valuation between what Atletico Madrid would probably be prepared to pay for Romero and what Spurs would be willing to sell him at. So we'll have to wait and see. But I do think that is something that, could be a huge factor of all this. But we don't expect Spurs to appoint a new manager until next week. So we'll have to see what happens there. I just wanted to touch on the story that I've written about Benjamin Sesko this afternoon. So Arsenal are in talks with Leipzig about a deal for Sesko. Of course, they tried to sign him last summer, and there was a loose approach not back in January when Arsenal were dealing with their injury crisis and they were looking to reinvigorate their attack with a signing, but Leipzig didn't want to sell. Sesko, of course, signed his new contract with Leipzig last summer. But now he wants out, and Leipzig want to sell him and Xavi Simons, as I've mentioned in previous videos, because they failed to qualify for Europe. But there's been initial discussions between Andrea Berta and Marcel Schaefer, who's the director at Leipzig. And it does look like Sesko probably is now the primary target for Arsenal. But the story really is that Sesko has been nursing a little bit of a knee issue. Now, from what I understand, it's nothing serious. It's more just sort of discomfort in his knee and an issue that kind of needs a little bit of rest following a long season. But Leipzig are a little bit concerned about the fact that Slovenia have still called up Sesko. And, if he plays in either of these matches and he makes the injury worse, that maybe it could scupper a transfer. Now, I know when I posted the article, a lot of Arsenal fans were saying, oh, another injury-prone striker. He's not injury-prone. It's just an issue that needs a little bit of an issue that needs sensible thinking really, just to aid his recovery and get him up to speed for pre-season. But from what I understand, Leipzig contacted Slovenia and said, we don't want you to call up Benjamin for the upcoming friendly. So Slovenia play tonight against Luxembourg in a friendly. Sesko hasn't travelled with the Slovenia squad, but they play Bosnia on Tuesday. And I understand Sesko is due to recommence or return to Slovenia's training base on Saturday morning, which is tomorrow morning, to basically continue his rehabilitation. But Slovenia are yet to rule him out playing against Bosnia on Tuesday. Now it's a friendly, but he's the star player of the team, and the team are trying to build some momentum ahead of World Cup qualifying. And they, ultimately international breaks don't come around often, so it's a rare chance to actually work with the players. And the next international break isn't until September, so I think Slovenia have made no promises to Leipzig and they want to keep him involved, but they won't, from what I understand, play Sesko unless he's definitely right to play. But Leipzig were adamant that he wouldn't be, because he went on the club's end of season tour to Brazil, where they played a friendly against Santos, and Sesko didn't train, and he's not trained since. Even with Slovenia, he's been away from the main group, doing sort of gym and physical work and just light training. But as I said, it's not a serious injury or anything that could scupper the transfer. The only way that the situation could worsen was if he was to play and then make it worse. But these guys are medical professionals in the Slovenia national team camp, and I'm sure they'll be well aware that Sesko wants to move and probably does want to move to Arsenal. So I don't anticipate it to be a problem whatsoever, and I would still be surprised if he played on Tuesday. I think, being sensible, I think the right decision would just be to leave him out and let him to, enjoy a bit of rest, as I said, from following the long season. But in terms of Arsenal's actual deal for Sesko, now there are talks, but Arsenal aren't really under any immediate pressure to do the deal. Of course, we've seen a real spike in transfer activity before the start of the Club World Cup, because clubs are keen to do deals, and also they don't want to risk missing out on players. But I think Arsenal are very much in the box seat for Sesko. There are other clubs that have looked at him, Chelsea and Manchester United included. There's also been some interest from Italy, but I think all parties are relaxed, and ultimately Arsenal, if they decide to go strong with a bid, I believe they'll get a deal done, but I'm not quite sure exactly when that will be. But the other player that they're looking at that I just wanted to touch on is Kepa Arrizabalaga. Now, last summer he signed a contract extension with Chelsea to protect his value, and then he went on loan to Bournemouth, where he was very impressive, to be honest. I think Kepa's a player that's got a reputation that doesn't really do him, service because of his time at Chelsea, and he was signed for a huge fee from Athletic Bilbao in 2018 under Maurizio Sarri, and he didn't live up to expectations. But he's been a backup goalkeeper at Real Madrid, won the Champions League. Bournemouth, he proved he can be a number one, but I think this would be very smart business from Arsenal. £5 million release clause. I don't think you can go wrong if you can convince the player to join. Obviously, he won't be first choice because David Raya is exceptional. But after deciding not to go for Juan Garcia, who looks set to join Barcelona, as I reported, Arsenal's interest has cooled. It doesn't really make sense, if we're being honest, to spend that much money on a backup goalkeeper, because they're not going to play, because Raya, unless he gets injured, is the outstanding number one. But it's very rare you see business between Arsenal and Chelsea nowadays. There was a period where Petr Cech was another goalkeeper that made the move to Arsenal from Chelsea, and then you had the likes of Willian, Olivier Giroud and David Luiz that were traded. I'm sure there's probably a couple of others as well, obviously Ashley Cole years ago. But I think this is a really smart signing if Arsenal push the button. I think I wasn't able to 100% confirm this, but I did hear a little whisper that PSV's Walter Benitez was an option that Arsenal were maybe considering, because he's a free agent. Although he shipped loads of goals against Arsenal in the Champions League this year, he's a vastly experienced goalkeeper, played in France with Nice as well, an Argentine international, and he's available on a free. there's been some Argentinian reports that he's got an offer from the Premier League and he's close, but I wasn't able to get a second source to confirm the Arsenal interest. But what I do know from speaking to people close to Walter Benitez is that Andrea Berta wanted to sign him last summer when he was at PSV to be the backup to Jan Oblak. So I wouldn't rule out the fact that Benitez could maybe come to the Premier League as either a number 2 or number 1 if he does arrive, but he'll definitely be leaving PSV this summer. But yeah, I thought I'd do another quick video just to wrap up some of the key stories from today and some of the stuff I've been working on, and I'll probably be back again soon.